Well, first of all, on this Independence Day weekend, or the weekend before the 4th, I welcome our friends at Miracle Mile and Watkins, Glen. Would you take a moment to welcome each other? We have, over the last number of weeks, talked about the purpose-driven family and how we can be more intentional or purposeful in the way we develop our individual families and our church family, that we can help provide an undergirding foundation for all that we're called to be. On this Independence Day weekend, I'm thinking about our national family too, and how much does our nation need our prayers. And I would remind you of a very familiar verse from 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. Would you read that with me? If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. You know, there's a lot of purpose represented there. And we have strayed so far, haven't we, in so many respects as a nation, let alone our own families. That verse was written roughly 2,500, 2,600 years ago. The next verse that I've included as our memory verse actually goes back about 1,000 years before 2 Chronicles 7:14, and that is the 90th Psalm. Reading just this one verse, Moses is believed to have written this psalm, the only psalm that he wrote that we have in the Bible. This is our memory verse. Would you read it with me? Teach us to number our days and recognize how few they are. Help us to spend them as we should. And I like to ask the address of our memory verse. Where is that? Psalm 90, verse 12. A few years ago, we had Don Sunshine. Some of you might remember him coming, challenging us in the area of personal evangelism. But one of the ways he conveyed to us the importance of being serious about our witnessing to other people is, you remember, he handed out very inexpensive paper tape measures. Anybody remember? If you have one, I'd love to see it. But it was a paper, I think an 8-foot long tape measure. 8 times 12 would be 96 inches. And he said, okay, take how old you are and tear off the part of the tape measure that represents the part that's already in the past, you know. And so in my case, I just passed age 66. So there goes 66 inches of the 96 right there. And that he said that if you don't think you're going to make it to 96, tear a few off the other end. What's left represents how much time you have left. I shared with you last week how I've been inspired to appreciate that what we do with the first part of our lives, or the first half of our lives, give or take, is the container that we establish. And then most importantly is the contents and the latter part of our life that we put in the container, or that is in the container as a benefit to other people. And we tend to think, don't we, when we're young, that we're immortal, you know, that we're going to live forever. Some of you look a little long in the tooth there, so I don't know. Just looking from my screen here. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm reminded of a song that goes way back to the 70s, and I got to get my pages straightened out here. Remember Harry Chapin? He lived in the 70s. He died tragically in a car accident. The Silhans might remember that he died on the Long Island Expressway. He was not quite 40 years old. He was on the way to a benefit free concert that he was going to do. He had a great heart for people. But he wrote these words, said, "My child arrived just the other day. He came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking 'fore I knew it, and as he grew, he'd say, 'I'm going to be like you, Dad. You know I'm going to be like you.' And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. 'When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when, but we'll get together then. You know, we'll have a good time then.' My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, 'Thanks for the ball, Dad. Come on, let's play.' "Can you teach me to throw?" I said, "Not today. I got a lot to do," he said. "That's okay." And he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. He said, "I'm going to be like him." Yeah, I'm going to be like him. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver moon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. "When you coming home, Dad?" "I don't know when, but we'll get together then. We'll have a good time then." Well, he came home from college just the other day. So much like a man, I just had to say, "Son, I'm proud of you. Can you sit for a while?" He shook his head and said with a smile, "What I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys." "See you later. Can I have them, please?" And the cat's in the cradle and the silver moon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. "When you coming home, son?" "I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad. We'll have a good time then." I've long since retired and my son moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, "I'd like to see you if you don't mind." He said, "I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's sure been nice talking to you." As I hung up the phone, it occurred to me he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. How quickly the time passes. And so when we think about kids or others in our lives that need our attention, I'd lift up to you 6 things that I believe that kids or everyone else needs. The first one is time. Time transcends all of this. Cats in the cradle reminds us of time. Psalm 90, verse 12. The time, I'd like you to look at each of these 6 items as a love over time. Rather than the slash, look at it as kind of a fraction. Love over time brings worth. Love extended over the time frame brings worth. Since I like to think back when I was a young pastor, 40 years or so ago, in that one of the first churches I served, we had a AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, met, and they were public meetings. They weren't closed, confidential meetings, and they would invite me as the pastor to sit in with them. And the ritual is, "Hello, my name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic." And then they'd go on and talk if they wanted to. Well, they'd come to me, and I would say, "Hello, my name is Bill, and I'm a sinner. I have an addiction problem to sin." Isn't that true for all of us? And they invited me to keep coming back. And then at the end of the AA meetings, every time, they would have something they would say to each other. "Keep coming back. It works if you work. It works if you work it. So work it because you're worth it." And I think of how important that is for us to appreciate that. Reminds me of the story you've probably heard of the little boy that was along the seashore. And this older gentleman, you might call him a old geezer, if you will. I understand that Miracle Mile, you guys had the Old Geezer Construction Company when you did that work there. Well, I want you to know that you don't have a corner on that name, because just this week at the men's Bible study, we have 9 or 10 guys that come Tuesday at noon. And the youngest guy in our group had the nerve to say, I have a name for our group. We could be the Old Geezers for Jesus. So just think about that. Well, this old geezer is there along the ocean, and there's this little boy who's frantically going along, and he notices the starfish have been swept up by the ocean, by the waves, and he's picking them up one at a time and throwing them back out into the surf so they won't dry out and die. And the old man says, "Well, son, what are you doing?" "Well, I'm saving these starfish." He says, "Well, there's got to be thousands and thousands of starfish along here. What does it matter that you do that?" He says, "Well, it matters to this one." And he throws another one in. We are worth it. And when we extend love over time, it matters. And we have to appreciate the fact that what we do is not futile. It's not pointless, but we have a calling to offer love over time. The second thing that kids need, or that everyone needs, is words over time. And that gives us direction. Everybody enjoys being appreciated and acknowledged, and that's so helpful to keep that in mind, that our kids or everybody else needs those words that expressed not just once, but over a consistent time frame, give us direction in life. There was a Jewish rabbi whose name escapes me. He was friends with Rabbi Kushner that wrote When Bad Things Happen, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. But this rabbi wrote a book by the title Words That Hurt, Words That Heal. And we have to be conscious of the words that heal and make sure that we offer them. I had a secretary in one of my first churches who had a little boy named Brad. And I was appalled to hear that the church preschool that he went to, one of the workers knew that he acted out. He was a real handful. Started calling him Brat instead of Brad. You know, how much damage could that do? Words that hurt. I grew up with a dysfunctional relationship with my father, and I can still. He's been dead since 1982. But I can still hear in my mind him saying, "You're a lazy, good-for-nothing brat. You're never going to amount to anything." And how much it took to overcome that over the years, you know, when you have that kind of seed planted over time. So we have to be careful that our words are words of healing and that they're consistently expressed over time. So we have love over time that brings worth. Words over time bring direction. Stories over time lead to perspective on life. I guess I'm getting sentimental in my old geezer stage, but when my daughter was little, I would often lay with her at bedtime. I'd lay on the bed beside her, and she'd say, "Tell me a story, Daddy." And she'd like to hear the stories of when I was a kid or family members and things like that. And I think I thought I'd exhausted every possible story. But Father's Day, Sunday, we were sitting at the lake, and she's there with her new husband, Andrew, and I thought of a story. "Amanda, I don't know if I ever told you this one before." And she would be quick to tell me if I had. She seemed to have a recall of everything I ever told her. And I actually found one, I don't remember what it was now, that she hadn't heard before. But that's part of our family nature. Kids need a connection to the past and to tell them stories, you know, especially when they're at that age when they're like sponges, wanting to soak up everything you say. It was that way in the Old Testament, Jewish history. You know, and I've said to you before, the word history actually is his story. It's God's story. But back in that day, the Jewish slaves had been led out of Egypt by Moses, and they were illiterate. Not one of them could read or write. Moses was the only one educated in Pharaoh's palace, you know, and Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. They had no television, no radio, no smartphones. You couldn't go looking things up on your phone. No electronic devices. Can you imagine what that must have been like? But they had each other, and they had storytelling. And I'm reminded of Deuteronomy chapter 6, where we see Moses saying this. First of all, beginning with verse 5. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." So tell these stories to the next generation. And then a bit later in the chapter, it says, "When your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations and decrees and the laws of the Lord our God that God has commanded us, you tell him, well, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes the Lord sent signs and wonders, great and terrible, on Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household. But the Lord brought us out from there to bring us in and give us the land he promised on oath to our ancestors." And so if we are careful, verse 25, to obey all this law before the Lord our God, as he commanded us, that will be our righteousness. And so pass it on to the next generation. And the reason that the Jews succeeded is because they took that to heart, and they memorized, and they learned it by heart, and they heard it at the fire at night, and they passed it on to the next generation, oral tradition was so important. Um, so we see that the importance of passing on our stories, our faith stories, our family stories to the kids or everybody else who needs to hear it, to give them a perspective on life. A fourth thing that kids or everybody else needs is to appreciate work, and work over time gives us significance. I was thinking specifically about you folks at the Watkins congregation this morning. You have a guy named Steve. We call him Woody sometimes. A couple months ago, I conducted the funeral for Steve's father, Bruce, who was also called Woody. And some of you were there. And Woody had a reputation that came clear at the time of his funeral, what a hard-working man he was. He worked at Shepherd Niles in Montour Falls for many, many years. He flew all over the country, but he made every effort to be home for his son's ball games whenever he could get back for those games. He worked so hard, not only for Shepherd Niles, but he always had an extra job, too. In fact, I learned that Woody used to work at the bait shop in Montour Falls. When I was a kid, I used to stop at this bait shop right there. I see Pastor Mark's here. Do you remember that fish and tackle store? Well, Bruce Woodworth worked there. So maybe you might have bought something from him like I think I probably did. But he had that ethic of hard work. And I think I just heard about that in another way, too. Joe and Sue Silhan's daughter is a hard-working woman up at the restaurant that she works at, and they tell me that she keeps getting promotions because Katie works so hard. We pass that on from generation to generation, that work ethic, and work spread over time gives us a feeling of significance. I'd like to turn to the Bible again, this time to the New Testament, to Colossians chapter 3, beginning with verse 23. It says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." Anyone who does not work is missing this whole point. Or I think back of Old Testament, Genesis 24, a familiar story to some of you, that Abraham's wife Sarah has died, and he's got a son Isaac, and he's very concerned that Isaac not marry somebody from the heathen territory they lived in. And so Abraham gets his very trusted servant to go back to his homeland and to represent Abraham in finding a wife for Isaac. And this story may be familiar to you. The servant prayed. I'm in Genesis 24, verse 12. The servant prayed, "Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I will water your camels also,' let this one be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." And it says, as he finished praying, Rebekah shows up. And indeed, to summarize the rest of the story, he asked her for a drink, and she said, "Oh, and I'll take care of your camels also." Now, it's one thing to give a thirsty guy, a drink. It's another thing to water a bunch of camels. You know how much camels drink. And so she went through all that effort. She had that work ethic that resulted in her finding a husband and becoming part of the lineage of the history of Israel because of her faithfulness to work. So work spread out over time, lived out over time, brings significance. Fifth, kids need fun. Fun over time gives them connection. I think about our growth groups, and we've had as many as 20 or 25 groups in a given season. Our growth groups schedule a ministry day when they work within the church. They do something within the church, and then they have a missions day where they reach out beyond the walls of the church. And then the third thing I like is they have a play day. You know how parents of little kids have a play date kind of thing? Well, the grown-ups, the old geezers, can women be geezers too? they have a role to play too, and they have fun with each other, and they learn to enjoy that fellowship and to play together. Can Christians have fun? I hope you're saying yes. I see your heads nodding there. Say this after me. It's fun being a Christian. Let's hear you now. It's fun being a Christian. And so we need to learn to instill fun in our kids and for them to see that we're just not, we're not like a bunch of old people, old geezers that have been baptized in lemon juice or vinegar, but that it's fun being a Christian. Back when I was a new Christian, I had a guy, a preacher that I used to admire. It's fun being saved, and it's fulfilling, and it's a great thing to know Jesus Christ. And I hope that fun is conveyed to kids and everybody else as well. A sixth thing that kids, and I believe everyone needs, is a sense of tribe or being involved in tribes. And that spread over time gives them a sense of belonging. We really do need each other. Say that with me. We really do need each other. Not one of us is intended to be the Lone Ranger Christian. Even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. But we're called to free our kids to be appreciative of their tribes. Now, I think about the Watkins tribe or the Miracle Mile tribe or the Pine City Saturday Night tribe or the Pine City Sunday Morning tribe. And we're kind of all tribes. We're all related to each other. One church, many locations, many tribes. I think of other tribes. Maybe you're involved in a service organization or a club or something like that. Pastor Mark's involved in a lot of boating kind of stuff. So those are tribes, if you will. And we have a chance to share Christ with people and tribes that we connect with. But to be willing to accept that and keep a sense of belonging and connection. I remember the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob, who became Israel, had 12 sons, and each of them was a tribe. And before Moses died, remember, he assigned each of them their own property, their own responsibilities. They very quickly lost their sense of being part of a tribe. It was really affected when Assyria conquered northern Israel, and 10 tribes disappeared. Those 10 lost tribes have really never been found again. There's a little sense of certain people have a Jewish heritage, but they really never kept track of where they all went. There were 2 remaining tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and then they were deported, and they were overcome when Jerusalem fell. And so for the time from roughly 70 years after Christ, 70 A.D., until 1948, Israel had lost their sense of identity. They really had lost track of their tribes. Maybe you've seen this happen in your own family, where you had a grandparent, a patriarch or a matriarch that held everybody together. When I was a kid, we had a family reunion in Mansfield, Pennsylvania every summer, and there'd be 150, 200 people there. And we were all connected because of our common heritage. And now that generation and even the generation after that died, and we don't have any connection. I could be sitting next to somebody at McDonald's and not even know they're my cousin. Now, anybody relate to that? So we need to to instill in our kids a sense of belonging. And part of it's belonging to our church family, also other aspects of being part of a tribe, so that we don't lose our identity. A recent phenomenon that helps us regain some sense of identity is found in the example of Ancestry.com or 23andMe. I think there's a third one out there too. And it's fascinating how with a little bit of work you can discover some connections you never knew you had. So I encourage you to take advantage of something like that. And if you're an old geezer, get a 10-year-old to help you. They'll figure it out. My daughter has helped us dig very deeply into ancestry, and it's just fascinating to appreciate. And my wife Linda's going on a road trip with a few of the other women in her tribe, and they're going to go to a bunch of cemeteries. Doesn't that sound exciting? But they're going to try to find the graves of people that long lost relatives they didn't even know they had. And it's something that's important for us. Kids need that. We all need that. We're all kids, right? So I've lifted up to you these 6 things that kids and I believe everybody else needs. And I pray that you'll take them into consideration. I shared with you already that the first part of our life can be looked at as a container. And we establish the structure or the container. And we want to help our kids establish a container that includes faith in Jesus Christ. Then the latter part of our life is filling that container with content and making sure that we have the quality content that can be conveyed and shared with other people as well. Have I given you something to think about on this Independence Day weekend? I hope so. Let's pray. Lord, I ask that you help us as we continue to craft the container of the identity that you've given us, that you help us to keep these 6 things in mind, and that we can build them into kids and everybody else as well. We depend on you to do that we might be purpose-driven family. In Christ's name, amen.